Oh, hello and welcome to What Are We Talking About? My name is Jamie Jakes, but you can call me Jamie Heineman today because we are going to do some myth busting. And that myth we are busting today is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Specifically, is he a slot receiver? It's a narrative that goes around. I'm sure you've heard it on TV. Today, I heard it on a mock draft video where whoever was doing the mock draft ended up having the Lions take an X receiver in the second round because, well, they got Amon-Ra there. He's their number one slot receiver. He's a slot merchant. He's the slot only style receiver. And we're going to go ahead and look into if that is actually the case or not. Okay, so let's get into the stats. If you were a slot receiver, where would you, class, usually line up at on passing plays? Of course, the answer is not a trick question. The slot, Amon-Ra, this season lined up from a wide alignment on 252 of his routes. He only had 240 routes from the slot alignment. So we actually this season lined up more from wide alignment than he did the slot. Now, this isn't a big surprise to Lions fans who've been close attention to this team. Amon-Ra, for a couple of years now, has been more efficient as an X receiver, but they like to use him as a slot. 5 touchdowns, both from wide and slot alignments. But look at what happens when we look into the yards per route run from wide alignments. Amon-Ra had 2.9 yards per route run, which is elite. That's really, really good. If he did that through the whole season on all of his routes, he'd be better than Jamar Chase. And we'll look into that in a second. 1.8 yards per route run from the slot. So he's less efficient and they use him there less. Not a slot, not sounding like a slot receiver to me. 0.48 for you EPA nerds out there per target, plus 0.81. So almost double the expected points added per target. So by definition, he is not a slot merchant. Actually, the opposite. He is a elite outside X receiver. And who's the first person that comes to mind when you think of elite X outside wide receiver? Of course, man, I already talked about Jamar Chase, who was Triple Crown winner, elite season last year. He ran 430 routes from wide alignment, 2.8 yards per route, which Amon-Ra had 2.9 from wide and had 0.55 EPA per target, so a little bit higher than Amon-Ra, who came in at 0.48 EPA per target. So similar efficiency from wide alignment when you're comparing Amon-Ra to Jamar Chase. When Jamar lines up from the slot, his efficiency numbers are very similar to Amon-Ra as well. Funny enough, the difference being, of course, the Bengals threw the ball so much last season, but also the ratio, about 70-30. 70% of the time he's wide, 30% of the time he's in the slot. As good as this Detroit Lions offense and Amon-Ra has been in this offense, they're kind of holding Amon-Ra back with how much they're having him play in the slot. And it's a roster thing. There really isn't an answer for it. Of course, you might think, well, maybe Sam Laporta would be a good answer to put in the slot. Sam Laporta is much more efficient from a tight alignment, from like an inline classic tight end alignment, 2.2 yards per route run from a tight alignment, which was really, really good last year. For a year that people would say he had a kind of like a down year from slot, he's not great. 1 yard per route run from the slot, Sam Laporta. So that's not a great answer. So let's look into how the Lions maybe could fix this problem and get a more of a permanent slot receiver, or a guy who could at least run 200 routes from that slot position. Keenan Allen would be the only free agent, I would say, who's available. He did say he wouldn't really be interested in Detroit, not specifically. He was like, it's really only going to be Chicago or LA, the two places I'll play, or I'm going to retire. I don't know if that's true. Players say things a lot. 2 months ago, Myles Garrett was never going to be a Brown again. Look at us now. He's back on the Browns' record-breaking contract. So Keenan Allen would be an okay target. His efficiency numbers honestly weren't that great last year. Is that him? Is that the Bears? Probably a little bit of both, right? He's getting pretty old. So Keenan Allen, if you wanted to come on a friends and family discount, try and chase a ring, could be a viable option. I think would actually really benefit this offense a lot. I think he has a lot better year with this offense versus what he had in Chicago last year with a rookie quarterback. Draftable slot receivers. This is actually kind of a low-key, pretty solid wide receiver draft. I think it's a lot better than 2 years ago. and it's not going to be anywhere near what last year's draft class was. I think my favorite guy in this draft class would be ranked behind Ladd McConkey. But there's good depth and there's good solid guys, especially from the slot position. If the Lions were looking in the first round for a slot receiver, Emeka Egbuka probably would honestly be there for the Lions. There's a pretty good chance he kind of slips down to the end of the first round there. Do they take him there? I doubt it, because there's probably going to be big players at positions of need that will be available to them, whether that'll be a pass rusher or an offensive lineman. They're probably going to go to one of those spots there with that first overall pick. In the second round, guys like Luther Burden might still be available. He's been a guy who's fallen down charts. I think he is a little bit of a character concern guy, but we've had Lions come in who have maybe not had their head on their shoulders, right? I think we all could agree that Jameson Williams wasn't the most mature prospect coming out of college, but I think the Lions have molded him into something that's been absolutely spectacular this year. So they can take on some maybe character concern guys like Luther Burden, who actually did line up from the slot, was elite on film, production wise. He was elite. Just whenever you look into the stats, it's like, man, this team really didn't seem to like this guy as a person. And a lot on film of him after penalty plays, bonehead stuff, getting in people's faces on the other side of the field, throwing punches, crazy stuff like that. So we got to get that out of his game, but that's why he would be available at 2, because if he didn't have that, he'd be probably one of the top 2 prospects in this draft class. Getting into the later rounds, Jalen Knoll, who's Iowa State, really, really good second to Jaden Higgins there, who I think sort of hot takey here, but I think is probably going to definitely go round 1 there. He's a solid slot receiver. He was pretty efficient over there at Iowa State, and he's a guy who I think could probably be available in the 3rd round. Some people are ranking him crazy high, like he's a first-round talent. I don't think that's the case, but I think he could be a really good steal for the Lions if they do end up needing a guy in the 3rd round, even a guy I could see them trading up in the early 3rd round to go get. Also, a guy I would be really interested for the Lions to get into would be Harold Fannin, who's rumored to be like a 4th round guy. He led college wide receivers in receiving yards and receptions last year, 1,555 receiving yards going off the top of my head. I did a whole video on him. I think he's my favorite tight end prospect, especially as a weapon in this draft class. He was their whole team. He destroyed Penn State. He had a pretty decent game against Texas A&M as well, with his quarterback having probably his worst game of the season. But he cooked Penn State. He was the only 100-yard receiver against Penn State last year, and the Lions could get him and line him up at slot, have Laporta play inline tight end where he's most beneficial, and have Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra playing outside. That would be, I think, a day 1 starter guy, a guy who has pretty good I went ahead and watched the whole Penn State game. He's got some pretty good run blocking snaps. One in particular on their first drive against Abdul Carter kind of pushed him off the line about 5 yards. It was pretty sweet. His pass blocking's kind of bad, which I think is why he would be perfect as like a tight end 2 slot tight end on this Lions offense. And final takeaway here, call to action fantasy implications here. Wide receiver 7 currently in best ball drafts, which are happening pre-draft. They're actually really fun. I've done a few. Wide receiver 7 going kind of the end of the first round. Of course, has 3 wide receivers. So in your 2 wide receiver leagues, he'll probably be around the 2 turn. He's currently my wide receiver 3 in half PPR best ball. Does have a new offensive coordinator going in. It's a guy who was with the team a couple of years ago, left for the Broncos gig, and is now coming back home. So a guy I think that they're very comfortable with, and a guy who's I think picked up a lot of things along the way. And, knock on wood, we all saw him in wide receiver. I saw him in wide receiver where he was banged up all season. He's a tough guy. He is available. The best ability is availability. Nailed it. And I think he could be the number 1 receiver in the league this season. Essentially, efficiency-wise, Jamar Chase. Now, of course, Lions are going to run the ball a lot again next year. So there is that. But, you know, new OC, maybe they air it out a little bit more with how efficient Amon-Ra has been. So I think we can firmly say we can bust the myth that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a slot receiver. He is an actually elite outside wide receiver. And the Lions do not need an X. They kind of need a slot, amongst other things. But the Lions offense, with all said and done, was excellent last year. It's probably going to be excellent this year. And there's room for improvement right here. And a third or fourth round pick on Jalen Noel or Harold Fannin, I think might go a long way in making this offense absolutely unstoppable and adding depth. So my name's Jamie Jakes. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.